Edward Kenway's journey in Assassin's Creed Black Flag had its fair share of highs and lows. After witnessing the loss of many of his closest friends, it was quite unexpected to witness the more uplifting ending of Assassin's Creed Black Flag. However, what happens in Edward Kenway's life after the events of Black Flag when compared to other assassins in the franchise is arguably the most tragic of them all. This video will contain spoilers for both the ending of Assassin's Creed Black Flag as well as some parts of the book Assassin's Creed Forsaken. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. So, if you recall the conclusion of Assassin's Creed Black Flag, we witness a rather heartwarming ending, where Edward Kenway finally reunites with his daughter Jennifer. He also generously offers the island he discovered to the assassins for their use as a base. Initially, it seemed like Edward was driven by the pursuit of riches, but in the end, he found something even more valuable, and that was himself. During the game's end credits, we see Edward sailing into the horizon, engaging in a light-hearted conversation with his daughter Jennifer. Although the game does not explicitly reveal their destination, it's safe to assume that they were heading back to England. After the credits, we're treated to an interesting post-credit scene set on December 4th, 1733, which is 11 years after Edward and Jennifer sailed to England, and is also the birthday of Haytham Kenway. The scene unfolds at the Theatre Royal in London, where an older Edward Kenway and Jennifer observe a play from above. Their peaceful moment is interrupted when they are approached by a man, Reginald Birch. Remember this name, as he plays a pivotal role in Edward's tragic fate in the years to come. The ending just essentially concludes with a brief showing of Haytham Kenway, serving as a quote-unquote cliffhanger. Now, if you're just an average gamer, you may think nothing of this. However, Assassin's Creed neglects to show us what transpires between the time period of Black Flag and Assassin's Creed 3. This gap in the story ultimately results in one of the most unfortunate conclusions for any assassin or protagonist we've had the opportunity to play as. Now, everything I talk about from this point on is not showcased in any Assassin's Creed video game, but rather the Assassin's Creed Forsaken book. So after that Theatre Royal post-credit scene, Edward Kenway, Jennifer, Haytham and Reginald Birch, who at that time was just a property manager for Edward Kenway, were walking home from celebrating Haytham's 8th birthday at the White's Chocolate House located in London, which was actually a real place back then that served hot chocolate. Of course, now in 2023, the White Chocolate House is purely a gentleman's club and has pretty much moved locations. How times change, I guess. I've actually walked past this exact place.
We do not care.
Anyway, let's not get off track. So after the four of them went to White's Chocolate House, they met with Tessa, who at that time would be the wife of Edward Kenway and also the mother of Haytham Kenway. Whilst the five of them walked back home from the celebration, they were approached by a mugger that attempted to forcefully take Tessa's necklace. Of course, this mugger wasn't exactly smart, considering Edward Kenway was there and he attacked the mugger. During this sequence, even Reginald Birch attempted to get involved, but Edward prevented him from killing the mugger. Now, the reason I've mentioned that part is because it all interconnects with each other. When they all arrived back home after the incident, Edward asks Haytham what he would have done to the mugger in his situation and if he deserved to be set free, and Haytham's response was that he would have decided on offering the man forgiveness. And because of Haytham's response, Edward gave him a steel sword as a reward. Now, do remember that steel sword, it's really important, as it would be the result of Edward's downfall. So, over the next 2 years, Reginald Birch was a man that grew comfortable with the Kenway family. He even attempted to win over Jennifer's love. However, Jennifer, who was well informed about the ongoing conflict between the Assassins and Templars, discovered Birch's affiliation with the Templars. As a result of her finding out about this, she immediately told her father, Edward Kenway. And of course, Edward, as we know, having affiliations with the Assassins, was completely pissed off, which pretty much led to a heated confrontation between him and Birch, resulting in some pretty harsh words exchanged before Birch stormed off in anger. Now here's where it gets pretty dark. Reginald Birch during this time was far past being a good person to the Kenway family. In fact, he already achieved his goal, which was to manipulate a young Haytham Kenway into revealing the location of Edward Kenway's secret journal. This journal consisted of secrets and information regarding the ancient civilization that was responsible for Pieces of Eden. The way Birch manipulated Haytham was by getting him to reveal the location of the steel sword that Edward gifted him 2 years ago, as I mentioned earlier. So on December 3rd, 1735, this is where Reginald Birch executed his evil plan, and that plan involved the Kenway household being broken into and breached by masked men. These masked men committed a lot of atrocities. Jennifer was kidnapped, as well as quite a few household staff members were murdered in cold blood. Edward, at the age of 42, of course, was not in his prime anymore, so after he ensured that his wife and son were safe, he then proceeded to hurry towards the gaming room, which was where the steel sword he gave Haytham would be stored. In this room stood two intruders. Of course, we all know Edward Kenway during the events of Black Flag would easily dispatch these two intruders with ease. But of course his age limited him, and after a very intense struggle, one of these intruders ultimately thrusted the exact same sword Edward gave Haytham into Edward's chest. Now if you've ever played The Last of Us 2, spoiler warning by the way for The Last of Us 2, you definitely remember this scene where we see Ellie sadly watch Joel die right in front of her very brutally. It's pretty much an identical case with Edward Kenway's death. So Haytham, who at that time was still very young, and he heard the sounds of struggles coming from the games room as the door was half open. One of those voices included Edward himself. So Haytham freed himself from his mother's grasp and ran towards the half-open door to attempt to help his struggling father. The moment that he ran through those doors, he saw Edward on his knees, very badly wounded. Standing over Edward was a man with his sword deeply into Edward's chest, where blood would be dripping from the blade onto the wooden floor. Without any hesitation at all, Haytham lunged at the intruder, but unfortunately was hit on the head with the leg of a billiard table, which almost knocked Haytham out flat. Haytham, being on the floor, dazed and laying across to his father, who would also be laying on the other side barely with his life in his eyes, stared at Haytham. And before Edward could say his last words, the attacker pulled his blade from Edward's chest, causing him to die. And that is sadly how our beloved Edward Kenway was killed. So you can pretty much see why it's the most tragic and sad death out of all the protagonists. His demise came from protecting his family and was completely betrayed by somebody who he had trusted for years. So now that we know how Edward Kenway's story ended, what happened to Jennifer, Haytham and Tessa Kenway? Well, let's start with Jennifer. So earlier in this video I mentioned Jennifer was kidnapped during the events of the Kenway Manor attack. While her story after Edward's death was very tragic, but it was also very relieving. So Birch himself sold Jennifer as a slave to Turkish slavers. Jennifer found herself in Topaki Palace as a concubine. Now if you do not know what a concubine is, it's pretty much a woman who lives with a man but has a significantly lower status than that man's actual wife. So it's pretty much a mistress. Anyway, by 1757, so we're about 22 whole years after Edward's death, which is a pretty long time, Jennifer had been transported to Damascus to serve under the Ottoman governor Asad Pasha al-Azam. However, as Jennifer was in her mid-40s during this time, she was considered too old for the role of a concubine, and instead worked as a servant. It's pretty sad knowing that she spent a considerable amount of her life pretty much as a slave. But surprisingly, her slavery work ends with good news. You see, Haytham and his loyal friend Jim Holden undertook a mission to infiltrate the palace and locate and rescue her. It doesn't end there though, because Jennifer revealed to Haytham that Birch was the man responsible for Edward's death. Of course, Haytham throughout all these years did not know Birch was responsible for everything. The three of them launched an assault on Birch's country home near Troyes, France. In Birch's office, Jennifer confronted him. Despite him holding a knife to her throat, she managed to maneuver him onto a sword pinned against the door, resulting in Birch being instantly killed. So to sum up, Jennifer Scott's story after this is pretty simple. She basically returned to London to take over the mansion. She was very determined to end this whole Assassins vs Templar thing, but sadly never did. In the end, she ended up passing away sometime in 1805. So now that we know what happened to Jennifer after Edward Kenway's death, what exactly happened to Haytham? Because we do know that he was knocked out and he watched his father die with his own eyes. Well, we already know the basics. Haytham is Connor's father. He's a Templar and he's considered somewhat evil, but not really. Reginald Birch pretty much took Haytham under his wing and trained him to become a Templar. Of course, during this time, Haytham had no idea Birch was the man responsible for everything, which meant Edward's death and even selling Jennifer. Oh, and also Haytham was not aware of his assassin heritage, which is why Reginald Birch took advantage of that. In 1754, Birch dispatched Haytham to the British colonies in America with the task of locating and finding a repository that is linked to the first civilization. In fact, we can actually see this scene play out at the beginning of Assassin's Creed 3. You know, now that I think about it, Reginald Birch could potentially be the most evil antagonist out of all of the Assassin's Creed lore. He pretty much manipulated everyone and everything, and he ruined the Kenway family. Anyway, by 1757, Haytham had uncovered the reality of Birch's betrayal and his role in the tragic events that befell his family. This revelation of course came after Haytham successfully located and rescued his sister Jennifer, which I mentioned earlier. Okay, now that we know what happened to Jennifer and Haytham, what about Tessa? She's not really mentioned much and was a very important person in the Kenway life. While Tessa, who just like Haytham, did not know of Reginald Birch's betrayal, as well as him selling Jennifer to Turkish slavers. Following the death of her husband Edward Kenway, she agreed to let Birch train Haytham in Europe. Tessa after this pretty much just stayed behind in England to see the Kenway manor get restored to its full glory, but sadly passed away only 12 years later after suffering a fatal fall, which is pretty strange. There's not any information on how or where she fell, but all we do know is that she fell and passed away. So there you have it. That is the very tragic life of Edward Kenway after Assassin's Creed Black Flag. You can pretty much see why out of all the protagonists we play as, Edward Kenway's tale is potentially the most heartbreaking. His death not only left a massive impact on the projection of Haytham being a Templar, but also on his entire family. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button for more Assassin's Creed. And with that said, I'll see you in the next one.